Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 21 of The Kill File. I am so excited to tell you guys about today's story, but first, a little business. I want to first off tell you guys that our Kill File community is growing, and how much I appreciate you guys for sharing anything that you have from our socials or word of mouth. And as I plan on doing this for a long time, I hope that you guys will continue to spread the word and get the word out there. So today's story is first off going to be a long one. I didn't plan on it being, but there was just a wealth of information, and since last week's was a two-parter, I'm going to just record this one all together, see how it goes, and hopefully you guys can give me some feedback whether you want just one long-ass story or do you prefer it broken down. Today's story is going to be somewhat of a known story, and it's kind of two stories wrapped into one. The first is of a little boy who went missing. It's very well known as it's national news. However, we're going to focus on the missing little boy's brother, who would go on to become a murderer and rapist in his own right. Today's case is going to cover the story of Cary Stayner. Today's trigger warnings are going to be murder, rape, sexual assault, mentions of pedophilia, child molestation, death of a minor, mutilation of a body, and other nefarious doings. So here we go. We're going to start today's story with the kidnapping of a young boy and younger brother of Cary Stayner, whose name was Stephen Stayner. On December 4th in the year 1972, in a place called Merced, California, a man named Kenneth Parnell would pretend to be collecting some donations for a church when he would spot Stephen Stayner walking home from school alone. Parnell would then insist on giving young Stephen, who was only a mere 7 years old at the time, a ride home. And when Stephen got into the car, Parnell instead took Stephen to his own cabin near Cathy's Valley. After a few days of Stephen's kidnapping, Parnell would sell the farce that he had gained custody of Stephen through the court system. While Stephen would remain in captivity for 7 long years, Parnell would change Stephen's name to Dennis Gregory Parnell, and then pass himself off as Dennis's quote-unquote father. Stephen would attend school as Dennis, and although not as often as a child should, friends and teachers would know him by the name of Dennis. I thought I had not only heard the story of Stephen Stayner, but Cary Stayner as well, but as I was furthering my research, none of it was ringing a bell. I like doing the cases that I don't know about because I start my script, and as I'm researching, which is why sometimes my own questions are answered later on in the stories, but I like being able to learn about the case right along with you. So basically, this is all new information for me because the only thing that I remembered hearing about was that Stephen was kidnapped and then later returned, and that was about it. So at this moment, I was wondering how this sweet 7-year-old little boy never slipped and said that his name was Stephen or told any friends or schoolmates what his real identity was. Was it because Parnell had fed him this story about getting pretend custody? This poor baby was probably all sorts of confused about what happened to his mother and his father and his siblings. I can't even imagine what Stephen was going through. So it was said that during his time in captivity that, quote, Parnell subjected Stephen to mental, physical, and sexual abuse. His hold on Stephen was such that the boy never revealed the truth about his circumstances, end quote. Ugh, the agony. This is just absolutely heartbreaking. So on the documentary that I was watching about Cary Stayner on YouTube called World's Most Evil Killers, it said that at some point apparently Parnell was basically telling Stephen that he was getting a little too old as he was hitting puberty and started trying to find someone younger. Gross. It was said that Parnell even tried to get Stephen to help him lure another little boy, but Stephen would later go on to say that he would secretly sabotage Parnell's plans. Unfortunately, Parnell would go on to kidnap a 5-year-old little boy named Timothy White in February of 1980. When Parnell brought this little boy home, he presented Timothy to Stephen as quote-unquote his new little brother. Thankfully, when this happened, Stephen was 14 years old and realized that this was just not right. and this brave little man escaped on the evening of March 1st, 1980, with little Timothy in tow while Parnell was at work. In 1984, Stevens said in an interview in Newsweek, quote, "It was my do-or-die chance, and I also would be coming home for doing something positive," end quote. The two boys hitchhiked together about 40 miles to Ukiah, sorry if I butchered that, and this is where Timothy lived with his parents, and they went to the authorities. In an infamous statement that would later lead to movies and books being written about this case, this now 14-year-old brave young man told authorities, "I know my name is Stephen." This would lead to the arrest and conviction of Kenneth Parnell, and despite the fact that he was found guilty in 2 separate trials for kidnapping these children, he was sentenced to only 7 years. Apparently at the time, this was the maximum sentence in California. Furthermore, he was let out early after only serving 5 years. What in the actual fuck, you guys? The good news is Parnell died in 2008 of natural causes in a state prison hospital in Vacaville. He died in January 2008 and was apparently serving a 25 years to life sentence for trying to buy a 4-year-old little boy and was convicted in 2004. This sick fucker. I will bet you anything that he has many more victims and that he has hurt so many more, and that kills me. So, as incredible as it was to have Stephen back in the Stayner home, not everything was wonderful for older brother Cary Stayner. In the documentary I watched, it said that of course the Stayner family and their lives were flipped upside down when the kidnapping of little Stephen happened. The Stayner family consisted of the father, Delbert Stayner, wife, Kay Stayner, and their 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys, Stephen and Cary. Cary would later go on to state that his father, Delbert, who had been a veteran of the Vietnam War, was stiff and possibly strict, I would imagine. It was said that Stephen was the quote-unquote apple of his father's eye. Cary would later go on to say that his father blamed him for Stephen's disappearance and for not watching out for his little brother. He would even go as far as stating his father would tell him when speaking about Stephen during his disappearance, quote, "Oh, he's the one son I really loved." If that's true, that is absolutely horrific to say to your child. It by no means excuses Cary's actions later on, but I do feel bad for the child version of Cary Stayner. Cary would later go on to admit that he had fantasies about kidnapping and killing women as young as 7 years old. One specific memory he speaks about is when he was in the parking lot of a grocery store in his family's vehicle. He was fantasizing about tying up and killing the female grocery clerks. Dr. Elizabeth Yardley on the documentary I spoke of said that she wondered where he would get the idea and where that would come from. She stated that these thoughts don't normally just appear and that he probably got the idea from somewhere. When the FBI investigator would later on ask him if anyone ever knew about his dark fantasies or internal struggle that he admits having most of his life, he said no one ever knew. He never told a soul until he was caught. You guys, we need to talk to our children. I'm not parent shaming by any means for them not knowing the side of Cary, but we can change the cycle of abuse and help our kids if we talk to them. I have legitimately told my children that if they ever found themselves having what they thought to be weird or out of what they consider normal thoughts, to come to me and that I will not judge them. I have told them that I will get them help and that we would go through anything together. Look, the truth is that we all have weird-ass thoughts that pop into our brain from time to time, and I'm sure we would all be absolutely mortified or scared to death if tomorrow there was some kind of machine that would show every thought that we have ever had in our heads. It's just human nature to have weird shit pop up from time to time, right? For most of us, we probably step outside of that and we're like, that was weird, or oh my god, I would never do that, or even, what the hell just brought me to that dark-ass thought? It happens, and what I tell my boys is that if weird stuff pops up more and more, or if they find themselves like fixated on something or feeling any urges to do anything that would not be healthy or whatever, to come to me. I mean, who knows if they ever would, but I can tell you for a fact that I had someone close to me who struggled with this as a kid, in thinking these bad thoughts, and they thought there was something wrong with them for having those thoughts. They would get stuck on the feeling or feeling like a bad person or being scared of themselves and their own thoughts. And they would even call me when I was in the Navy stationed away, and we would talk through it. They were young, and they needed to be told that it was all right and that there was nothing wrong with them. We all need that safe place to take our darkest shit to and not feel judged and not feel alone, am I right? I try so hard to do things for my children that my shit parents never did for me. That's what we're all trying to do, right? End the cycles that fucked us all up as kids. So, talk to your kids. Have the weird conversations. Step outside your own comfort zone and talk to your kids about the important issues in life that they will face. And let's not make them deal with shit on their own. No kid wants to feel alone or like something is wrong with them. Open up the conversation, and eventually those awkward talks, they don't feel so awkward. And you can really get to know what's going on in our kids' lives, right? I don't know if this would have helped Cary at all or not, but maybe if he felt safe enough to talk to somebody about these dark fantasies that started so early, maybe he could have gotten help. Maybe he wouldn't have ended up where he did. Who knows, but I think it's worth a try. Cary would also go on to say that abuse was also in his family. He claims that his uncle Jess sexually abused him as a child, and he felt those negative experiences also affect him. I mean, how could they not, really? A psychiatrist who evaluated Cary for his court defense would go on to say that not only was his family rife with mental illness, but that there was also sexual abuse that would go back 5 generations. According to the psychiatrist's report, Cary Stayner was actually ordered to go to therapy for sexually abusing his own daughters. I tried to find evidence whether this was true or not, but I had a hard time. These allegations were barred from his court hearing because of objections from the prosecution. So maybe they aren't. Maybe it's just something that Cary said in his defense. I'm not sure. However, later on we're going to find out that Cary's parents did testify to their own behavior, and it's not great. It was stated by their mother, Kay, that she wanted to get Stephen therapy because of everything that he went through and his abduction, and then the media that was following them everywhere, including following Stephen to school. I mean, this story was endless, and it was everywhere. She stated that she wished she had done things a lot differently. When Kay wanted to get Stephen therapy, Delbert shut it down, apparently, which to me says a lot. Not necessarily that he's like a child molester or anything by any means, but maybe he was kind of strict, and it seems to me that men, especially from his generation, aren't exactly known for their open-mindedness to mental health help, which is sad, and hopefully we are headed in the right direction with that. As all of this was going on in the media and around their house, Cary was said to have felt that he was living in the shadow of his brother's miraculous return and then heroism for saving the 5-year-old little boy as well. As Stephen's younger sister, Corey, had stated, they had all just wanted to go back to their quote-unquote normal lives, and that this was hard for them to do when there were cameras everywhere all of the time. I can't imagine. I would absolutely hate that myself. I also can't imagine what this whole family was going through. Losing their brother or son, wondering what happened to him for so long, and wanting to just have answers. It came out that their father, Delbert, was in a constant search for Stephen, driving through hills, quote, looking for makeshift graves and follow suspicious vehicles with hopes of locating Stephen, end quote. It was also said that their mother, Kay, refused to leave the house for the first 2 or 3 years because she was afraid that she might miss a call from Stephen, which is absolutely horrific for her. I can completely understand this, and I can't even imagine what she was going through. The horror of losing a child is just beyond. Okay, so we have the Stayner family. They lose their little boy or brother, Stephen, for 7 years, not knowing what happened to him. And I'm sure going back and forth in your mind, like, is he dead? Is he alive somewhere? The turmoil this family endured, I'm sure, was just endless for those long 7 years. Cary would later say that he was most definitely pushed to the side after Stephen's kidnapping and after his return. Dr. Yardley spoke to the fact that she believes that Cary definitely had a narcissistic side to his personality by what happened later on in Cary's life and also the things that he thought and said after everything came to light. One point that Cary has said to have expressed was pure rage when Stephen was featured on Good Morning America and their father Delbert was hugging Stephen. I guess Cary was not treated in such a way and stated that he did not receive hugs from their father. Cary would later on go on to say that he no longer felt as his own individual, but was rather, quote-unquote, the missing child's brother. Fast forward 10 years, and unfortunately for the Stayner family, tragedy would strike for the second time with the untimely death of Stephen. By the age of 19, Stephen was married to his wife, Jody Emerson, which he met while he was working at a butcher shop. Not long after they wed, they had 2 children, a girl named Ashley and a boy named Stephen Jr. Jody has said of her late husband that he was a great dad and a complete family man. Soon after these happy times, a movie would be born about Stephen's story that he was very excited about and was helping with the script on. Sadly, the night before the Emmys, Stephen was on his way home from work on a motorcycle that he had bought with the money from the said movie when he was killed in a hit and run at the young age of 24. This is when Cary's dark side would start to present itself after the death of his brother. At this time, Cary was living with his allegedly abusive from childhood Uncle Jess. It was said that at one point, Cary's Uncle Jess would be found murdered in his own home. Now, to this day, Cary maintains his innocence in this case as never being involved. Uncle Jess was allegedly killed by a drifter that would never be named and never be found. Cary Stayner was the age of 42 when he was discovered shot to death in his house on December 26, 1990. His body was discovered by a friend who had been driving by his house and found that his front door was wide open and then stopped to investigate. It was said that Jess was just home during his lunch break and was driving a work truck that was apparently stolen by the killer and never found. At some point, Cary found himself more isolated and more alone when his parents moved away from his hometown. In the year of 1995, Cary sought help from a psychiatrist when his rage apparently began to flow and he became scared. Cary stated that he felt 1 minute like everything was fine, and in the next, he felt like he wanted to kill all of his coworkers. Apparently, this psychiatrist didn't think much of it, as it was brushed off as a, quote, one-off. I think it's safe to say that this was not true considering what happens later on. I feel like there was just so many missed opportunities here for Cary to be helped on some level. Whether it be therapy as a child after having fantasies about torturing and killing women, after his brother was kidnapped, after his brother returned, or in general for the lack of affection from his parents, especially his father. Nonetheless, apparently this particular psychiatrist thought Cary was apparently just fine. This is the point in time where Cary decided he wanted to go live off the grid, so to speak, in the woods. Cary was able to land a job as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge Motel near Yosemite National Park in California. He was able to score an apartment above a diner, and by all accounts, people thought Cary was as nice as could be and a lovely man. Everyone seemed to love Cary's hippie lifestyle, and he seemed to fit right in with the crowd near Yosemite. Cary was said to be having an inner war with himself at any given time, almost between good and evil, but he did find respite in hiking. Cary was also said to be a nude sunbather, and he did this quite often. It was speculated that Cary may have been struggling to control his sexual urges at the time and found solace in nude sunbathing, sometimes with others. I can't imagine hiking somewhere and then stripping down and just being naked in the woods. Like, if I knew for 100% fact that no one would ever see me, I can imagine that it would feel so freeing and empowering, but at the same time, like, the woods are nasty. And I'm just too clean to park my naked butt on some moss or dirt or bug-covered rock. No thank you. Also, I would be so terrified that some animal would come after me and then my naked ass would be running from a bear. Cary seemingly was desperately trying to control his inner demons and would often partake in the cannabis. An author and journalist who spoke on the documentary often was a man named Jeffrey Wanzel. Spoke to the fact that obviously marijuana was not the reason for Cary's murderous ways, nor does one directly cause the other. However, he did say that he felt that smoking so much weed may have further underlined Cary's imbalance. I took this to mean that maybe his emotional or rational imbalance. He obviously had some stuff going on at this time. While Cary was living next to Yosemite, he apparently became obsessed with the notion of Bigfoot. He was absolutely convinced that Bigfoot existed and he wanted to find him. Dr. Yardley spoke to the fact, and I found this interesting, that possibly for Cary, this may have represented a, quote, childish kind of pursuit of the monster under the bed. You quite enjoy talking about it. You quite enjoy the feeling of kind of fear that you know isn't real because you're actually safe. She went on to say that she felt Cary never really had a safe space to nurture these kind of monsterish, scary stories. She also, the reason for the way she spoke was from another country, I want to say maybe Britain, and I absolutely loved listening to her, but that's why she spoke so fancy with "you quite like this" or "you quite like that." I really liked it. She felt that this may have came out while Cary was an adult because he never got the chance to do this as a child. I found it fascinating and wondered if that was something that we are all supposed to go through or usually do go through in our own childhoods. Mr. Wanzel thought this obsession with Bigfoot may be Cary's obsession with his own dark side. I myself wondered if this was something that Cary maybe sought out because it was something else to focus on other than his inner struggle, and possibly because it was something that he was not in control of. Since they spoke of him maybe feeling like he needed to stay in control of his dark fantasies, maybe Bigfoot allowed him to lose that control and embrace that unknown a little bit. Who knows? By the end of the year 1998, this is when it was said that Cary was starting to come apart. There was said to be an explosion within Cary, and Jeffrey said that marijuana is known to alter your perception. He said it could have contributed to maybe this being altered. He may have been harboring this quote-unquote other personality for so long that it was finally taking its toll on him. February 14th, 1999, Cary observed a red Pontiac Grand Prix pull into the Cedar Lodge Motel, and in it was mother Carol Sund, daughter Julie Sund, and Julie's friend/foreign exchange student, Silvina Peloso. It was said that Carol was friends and close to Silvina's mom because she had lived in Argentina, which is where Silvina was from. Carol was a foreign exchange student nearly 3 decades before Silvina came out to stay with them. All right, you guys, this next part gets a little rough, so just forewarning. Julie was 15 years old and Silvina was just 16 years old. When they pulled in to get a room, Cary knew that they were the only people in that entire section of the motel. When Cary would later be caught for his crimes, and we will go into that right now, but before we do, I have to note that when he was caught, he ended up confessing to all of his crimes immediately to a news reporter who was able to get in before he had even been interviewed by the authorities. This news reporter, whose name is Ted Rollins, was the first person to receive Cary's confession and the demands that Cary wanted. What I mean by that is he sat down at the glass to talk to Ted. He picked up the phone and immediately he said he wanted Ted to contact Hollywood producers, and then he wanted there to be a movie about him, and he also wanted a story of the week made about his crimes. This is when Ted realized that these are the things that happened when Stephen returned to tell his tale. He was given a book, he was given a movie, and a story of the week, which I guess is something they did on an older show. Like, you can really see how much he may have been suffering with his brother in the spotlight for so long, that you're being charged with some serious crimes, man, and your first thought is that you want a movie and a show about your crimes? It makes me wonder if Cary is completely full of shit, and that he didn't have any dark urges or anything, but he was a petty little shit who was jealous of his brother and all of the attention that he was getting, and he wanted to make his own story happen. I can completely understand growing up feeling left out and jealous of what was happening for Stephen and how everything was always about Stephen. And that's what therapy's for. You work through that stuff and you move on, but you don't go on a killing spree. Cary told Ted at one point that he had fantasies about capturing and torturing 2 young girls. Gross. Okay, now back to the Cedar Lodge. So Cary goes up to the door of the 3 ladies and starts knocking. Carol, the mother, was hesitant, as she should be, and was asking who was there and what they wanted. Cary said that he was the handyman for the lodge and that he needed to come in and fix something in the bathroom. Carol told him to hang on. She left the door, shortly returned, and said there was nothing leaking and nothing wrong. Which, good for her to check and come back instead of just opening the door to the maintenance guy. Although it did say it was 11 p.m., so I guess that was probably part of it. This is when Cary started insisting that he come in and telling her, "No, ma'am, I've got to come in. You've got to let me in there or I'm going to lose my job." He apparently was extremely persuasive, and this is when Carol would unfortunately make the fatal mistake of opening the door. When Cary entered the room, he immediately pulled out a gun and ordered the 2 young girls into the bathroom and locked the door. Which I was curious about, how did he lock the door from the outside? Well, the documentary stated that he put the 2 girls in the bathroom, but other articles that I read that were based on his confession tapes stated that he actually bound and gagged all 3 of the ladies and then took Carol into the bathroom. I'm not exactly sure. There was a couple of conflicting stories and little details, but regardless, he had taken control of the situation. Anyways, this is when Cary would go on to trigger warning, strangle, and shoot Carol. Now, the documentary said strangle, but the rest of the sources said strangle and shoot. Either way, he took her life. He then took her body to the rental car that Carol and the girls had come in, and he put her body in the trunk. Cary then went back to the hotel room, brought both of the girls out of the bathroom, and, trigger warning, sexually assaulted both girls. Now, this next bit is from a source and speaks to Cary's taped confessions and the information that was on those tapes. Cary would go into more detail of the murders and assaults, stating that he ripped the younger girls' clothes off and proceeded to sexually torture and assault each of them for a while. He also admitted to trying to get each of them to perform sexual acts on each other. Cary went on to say that after about 6 or 7 hours of this, he became frustrated by the, quote, girls' lack of cooperation and his own inability to maintain an erection, end quote. Oh, I'm sorry, Cary, are these poor helpless teenage girls who you are torturing and abusing not doing it for you? He should be chemically castrated and physically as well. You had your chance with your appendage and now you're going to lose it. After becoming frustrated with the assault, Cary stated he took Selvina to the bathroom and he strangled her. And then he took her body and placed it in the trunk as well, next to Carol's body. He then went back into the motel room and again sexually assaulted Julie. This is when it said in the documentary that he had convinced himself that he was now in some sort of relationship with Julie, the 15-year-old teenager. And now, inside of his quote-unquote mad fantasy world, she needed to be cherished, unlike the other 2. This is when Cary would take Julie to the rented Grand Prix with both of the bodies in the trunk and drove her east out of Yosemite. He ended up driving her to a reservoir called Lake Don Pedro, which was said to be very remote and about 90 miles east of the Yosemite National Park. When they arrived to a spot that was said to have a beautiful view, Cary picked up Julie like a groom would carry a bride. He was said to have placed her down at a vantage spot, and then right around sunrise, he, trigger warning, slit her throat and left her to die. In his trial later, Cary would actually say, quote, she asked me if I was going to kill her. I didn't say anything, end quote. When the sun rose, Cary further stated, quote, I told her I loved her and slit her throat, end quote. Oh my God, what a piece of shit. This is when Cary would call a taxi to take him back to the Cedar Point Lodge. The taxi driver remembers Cary asking her if she believed in Bigfoot on their long drive back, and when the driver replied that she did not, he told her, quote, well, you should. Jeffrey, the author and journalist, stated that he felt that this interaction had indicated that Bigfoot was maybe the dark side of Cary. When Cary returned to the Cedar Lodge, he acted as if absolutely nothing had happened and went about cleaning the room that Carol and the young girls had been staying at, which wasn't out of the ordinary since he was a maintenance man. It wouldn't be weird to find his prints inside the motel room. Carol was supposed to meet her husband with the 2 girls in tow at the San Francisco airport a day or 2 later, and when they didn't show up, he tried to track them down. However, he just assumed that since he couldn't find them, that maybe they were just on their way to the airport. It wouldn't be until 4 days after their murders that there would be a missing persons report filed for the 3. The authorities conducted searches and investigations into the disappearance of Carol, Julie, and Selvina. When they interviewed Cary about the case, the authorities stated that he was stoic and calm and didn't throw up any alarm bells. Later on, Cary would confess that despite his outer appearance of being calm, he was actually freaking out. He said that his heart was racing and that he was nervous. Cary went on to convince himself that the FBI was going to come arrest him at any minute. After only a few days of the murders, Cary grew paranoid that he had not covered his tracks well enough and returned to the Red Grand Prix with gasoline in hand took any evidence out of the car that he could find, and decided to torch the vehicle. He then wanted to throw the FBI off his trail, so he had taken Carol's son's wallet with him. He then drove to Modesto and left it there for somebody to find, and somebody did. A random person was walking and found her wallet. However, Cary's plan to hopefully send the FBI in the complete opposite direction did not work out as planned. The minute the person turned Carol's wallet into the police, the case went from a missing person case to a criminal case. They now knew that there was foul play involved. After an entire month, and as the missing mother and two girls' case was starting to go cold, a local man that had been hunting in the woods stumbled upon the charred Grand Prix. Of course, in the trunk, bodies were discovered, but they were said to be so badly burned that they were unrecognizable. In fact, they actually had to use DNA to test and find out the identities of the two victims. They still had no idea where Julie was. At this time, Cary had been and was still very helpful to the authorities and was not even a suspect in the case and was on nobody's radar. In fact, the authorities had about 7 or 8 suspects on their list, and they weren't even looking at Cary at all. It was said that Cary probably enjoyed the feeling of being close to the case and being helpful on it. It may have also given him hope that he wasn't even looked at. This is when Cary would send a letter to the FBI himself. It said that Cary may have been feeling so confident and even arrogant at this point. He tells the FBI where they can find Julie's body. He draws the FBI a small map to the area, then says in the letter, quote, "We had a lot of fun together." Sick fuck. This would be 2 weeks after the car had been discovered, and now the FBI received this letter and were able to find Julie's decomposing remains that were said to be hidden in some underbrush by a river called Merced River, and this is located in Modesto County. When they found Julie's remains, we already know that she had a slit in her throat, but apparently it was so brutal that he had almost completely decapitated her. Ted Rollins, the news reporter, said that when the details of Julie's brutal murder were released, it changed the whole view and feeling of this case. He said, now, quote, "People now knew that these women were not only murdered, but brutally murdered and possibly tortured," end quote. It had been 3 months since the brutal murders, and at the time, the authorities believed that they already had the killer in custody. They fully believed it to be one of the druggies or criminals that they had brought in who were responsible for the murders. The authorities felt that all they needed to do now was build their case around their suspect and hopefully convict that person. It wouldn't be long before the FBI realized they were dead wrong. The excitement from the first few murders was seemingly wearing off for Cary, and now he decided it was time to do it again. On July 21st, 1999, Joey Ruth Armstrong, who was a worker of the park, would end up being at the wrong place at the wrong time and fall victim to Cary Stayner. Joey was a 26-year-old woman who absolutely loved nature and was said to have a big, beautiful smile. Her mother was said she was so happy with her new job and that she was loving living out there and working where she did. Joey was busy loading her car next to where her co-workers and her lived in a cabin that was located in the woods. This was said to be about 30 minutes from where Cary worked at the Cedar Lodge. Cary would go on to tell the news reporter in his first confession that the minute he realized that Joey was alone, that there was something inside of him that clicked. When he stopped and was talking to Joey, he was telling her that he was in the area, that he would often go because he had seen Bigfoot there before. It was said that they struck up a conversation, probably about working in the park, and then Cary would find himself with this opportunity to victimize her. I have talked about this before with people close to me, wondering if some people who kill others, or maybe end up being serial killers, if sometimes they are just crimes of opportunities, or if they change after that. I don't know. I often wonder if more people would kill others if they had more of an opportunity, and what the difference is in people like us who have no desire to kill others, given any opportunity or not, and people like this, if given the opportunity, they would in a heartbeat. Although in his case, it seems to be that he may have fantasized about torturing and killing women since he was young, and if that is to be believed true, then there is the drive for that opportunity. Joey was packing her car because she was headed to meet with some friends in Northern California for a hiking trip while this interaction was happening. At some point, Cary pulled out a gun and forced her into the house where she and her cabin mates lived. He then proceeded to duct tape Joey's mouth and hands, and he managed to get her into his car where he tried to take off in order to kidnap her. Being the brave woman she clearly was, Joey was able to jump out of Cary's car and take off running for her life. Unfortunately, because she was bound with tape, she wasn't able to make it far before Cary caught up to her, tackled her, and then grabbed her. I did read in one of the articles that he had bound her in a way where, the only thing that she could do was basically walk. At this point, it was said that Cary absolutely lost his temper and lashed out on poor Joey. He then attacked the women with such brutality and such violence that he successfully had, trigger warning, decapitated Joey. Cary would later say that there was so much blood that he was actually unable to see her face. This would be the murder that ultimately led to Cary's capture. It makes me so sad that this sweet young woman was just out there living her best life and loving it, and this giant piece of shit saw an opportunity and took it, ending her life. I think either way, Cary planned on killing her, and at least she tried to make a run for it and gave herself a chance. It also makes me happy that in her effort to save her own life, she would be his undoing. When Joey didn't show up to meet her friends as they planned, the friends went looking for her at the cabin where she lived. While inside the cabin, her friends could see what seemed to be a sign of a struggle, and this caused them to call the police. This would be the moment the FBI realized they did not have the right person in custody, and they released the suspects. After authorities searched the area, a park ranger found her remains near a stream that was in the woods, and sadly, in the water, only a few feet from her body, they found her head. The day after the discovery of her remains, there was a tip that was called into the authorities that there had been a blue and white 1979 International Scout vehicle that was apparently parked by the cabin on the day of Joey Armstrong's murder, and this car would be traced to Cary. 2 park rangers were looking for Cary's vehicle when they spot it and ultimately find him sunbathing naked near a stream, as, again, he was known to do. The rangers took his backpack, but basically just let him be. I was curious, can a park ranger make an arrest? I don't exactly know the authority of a park ranger in national parks. So when I looked it up on the LII, which is the Legal Information Institute, and this is part of the Cornell Law Education Program, part of the 54 U.S. Codes 102-701, entitled Law Enforcement Personnel Within System, that park rangers are allowed to not only carry firearms, but they can actually also make arrests without warrant for any offense against the U.S. that is committed in front of the ranger, or for any felony charges that the ranger may feel is being committed, or if someone is fleeing to that area to avoid charges. So they are basically exactly like police in that they can carry a firearm, execute a warrant, arrest someone, and they can even conduct investigations. They can also be used as supplemental law enforcement if needed. You learn something new every day. So after the rangers let Cary do his thing, it was said that he was again interviewed at the Cedar Lodge, but again he was able to go free. Now, one source said that Cary was actually arrested that day for having marijuana, but due to a clerical error, he was released. This was not in the documentary, but it was said by a Mariposa police officer named Reinick, who would be one of the officers that would bring him in for questioning later on. It was said that the authorities took some samples as well as photographs of Cary's tires so that they could match the tires found at the scene. Unfortunately for the authorities, it would turn out to not be a good idea to let Cary have another day of freedom. After realizing that they may be onto him, Cary fled the area. When the authorities were able to match his tires to the tire tracks found at the scene of Joey's murder, they went to pick up Cary and figured out he was gone. The authorities then put out an APB on him and found him within 48 hours. He was found to be in a nudist camp called Laguna del Sol in Sacramento. He had been sitting in a restaurant inside the nudist camp, and he had struck up a conversation with a woman named Janet Damant, who had actually seen the bolo for Cary, and she would be the one who led the FBI to find him. She said it would be easy to spot him as he was the only person wearing clothes. You guys, first off, are nudist colonies or camps still a thing? Also, I have so many questions about this. Do they do everything naked? In my head, I figured that they would walk around naked or did like naked campfires at night or something. But when this woman said that Cary was the only person wearing clothes, it clicked in my head that this woman was working there, and maybe other people in this restaurant were eating, and they're all naked? That is absolutely wild. No judgment from me. I wish I had the courage to be naked in front of anyone, let alone an entire camp or colony. I can only imagine how freeing and empowering that is for them. Being the scientific-minded person that I am, though, all I can think about is the germs that naked butts are spreading everywhere, and how I would never be okay sitting anywhere that is naked and not cleaned with bleach. Do any of my listeners out there know anything about nudist camps? Because if you do, I need to know more about these fantastic people and the way that they live without shame. Anyways, this is when, after being arrested but not yet interviewed by the authorities, he would give his first confession to Ted Rowlands. Ted stated in the documentary that he was very quote-unquote clinical in the way that he spoke. He stated Cary's voice never went up or down and that he showed very little emotion, if any. Ted would further state that when Cary spoke about the murders that he had committed, that he seemed very detached. He would also go on to say that when Cary confessed to these murders, that he did not only gloss over the details, but that he in fact lied to the news reporter in saying that he never physically abused or tortured any of his victims, which we now know is absolutely not true, and it makes me wonder if he's just trying to control the narrative here, and that's why he confessed first to the news reporter, or if it's simply the fact that in the prison hierarchy, child molesters or abusers often get the shit kicked out of them or killed while they're serving time. Remember, Julie and Sylvina were only 15 and 16 years old. Ted felt like the reason that Cary lied to him was because he wanted the credit for these murders, but was embarrassed to admit the sexual assault and torture, that he did not want the public to know this part. There's a lot of speculation that Cary Stayner could be connected to more murders, but has yet to make a confession about any more. When Ted Rowlands asked Cary if there was a message that he would like to tell the families, the Sun family, the Peloso family, and the Armstrong family, Cary said this: he was sorry that their loved ones were where they were when they were. Ted stated that this was extremely haunting to him, because to him it was saying that Cary could just not help himself and that there was nothing he could do about it. He further went on to say he sort of got the feeling that Cary was trying to convince Ted that he was some sort of a hero by being able to resist his dark tendencies for his 38 years that he had been alive. So after Cary was arrested and was being taken to the field office, the officer, Reineck, struck up a conversation on the drive back with Cary about his brother and asked if he felt the 7-year sentence that the monster who kidnapped him and abused him got was just. Cary replied it was absolutely not, and Reineck would later go on to say that he felt that he was able to make some sort of a connection to Cary, and that he also felt that this was absolutely pivotal. So I read in one source that Reineck would later be the author of a book called In the Name of Children, which is apparently a true crime account of cases that Reineck investigated within his career with the FBI, and the case of Cary Stayner is in it as well. If you're looking for a good true crime book, maybe check that out, and then let me know your thoughts on it. So the next little bit about Cary is from the A&E article that I found, and they actually took an excerpt from Reineck's book, so I wanted to make sure to let you know that this next part is directly from his book. Reineck recounted that while he was alone in the room with Cary, that Cary had just now taken credit for not just the murder of Joey, but also for the killings of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina. However, now he was trying to request things in order for his cooperation. When Reineck would go on to ask what Cary wanted in order for his continued cooperations, this is when Cary would ask for something that would disgust, anger, and shock not only Reineck, but most people, I would assume. So Cary started by trying to vaguely hint at the cases that he basically wanted Reineck to guess that Cary would be able to help him solve. Then, according to the book, Cary finally got to the point. He said, quote, "I'd like to see pictures of little girls." When Reineck flat out asked him, are you asking for child pornography? Reineck said that Cary would not call it what it actually was, and just said again, quote, pictures and videos of little girls. Cary said that he thought they may have some in the evidence room or somewhere in the building. Are you fucking serious, dude? Do you really think in your corrupted, twisted brain that these FBI officers are going to be like, yeah, sure, here's some child pornography for you to look at while you help us out with these cases? No. In what world? Reineck said in his book that he could just feel the anger rising inside of himself as Cary said these words. I heard once somewhere in this true crime universe, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was, that it's probably hard for authorities to have to sit there and listen to people confess their horrifying crimes, and that they themselves just have to pretend like hearing this shit doesn't bother them, or they have to keep up like a friendly composure towards these monsters just so they can obtain the confessions. Can you imagine having a conversation with somebody pretending to get closer to them in order to hear their disgusting crimes and then try to retain composure and not scream at them for just being the most putrid, revolting, loathsome human scum that they are? What a job. I can't imagine the physical and psychological toll that this would take on a person. I don't know if I could do it. I am one of those people who wears my emotion on my face. Like, I catch myself in public making just a disgusted face when I walk by someone who stinks or bothers me without even realize that I'm doing it. I don't even think I could keep my face straight from getting pissed or keep my composure during stuff like this. Anyways, Reineck said in his book that he felt this sort of trust and bond with some empathy growing inside himself for Cary because he had just opened up to him about the nastiness inside of him and told him all of these disgusting secrets so that Reiner could stop Cary from killing again. Reineck said that he was now worried that Cary wasn't confessing to his crimes because it was the right thing to do, and it was not about giving closure to these families, but that this was rather Cary trying to see what he could get from the authorities, and not just something like a plea deal, which Reineck said would be understandable, but instead was asking for, quote, something so base and unspeakable even he couldn't say the words, end quote. This is when Reineck would go into the inside of these situations, saying that he had to hold back his own emotions so that he could concentrate on his goal here. He felt maybe Cary was testing him to see if he would judge him, or even a little battle for control. Reineck said that it could have been a last sad attempt at satisfying the darker urges inside of him, but that either way he was asking something of him that was not only illegal, but unethical and was something that he was obviously not willing to do. Worried that the authorities didn't have enough evidence against him to get this monster off the streets, Reineck played his hand very well and simply told Cary he didn't have the authority to grant requests of any kind and that he would pass it on to the higher-ups. I think that this was smart because obviously he wasn't going to do this, but he could remain the confidant while making the quote-unquote higher authority the bad guys without breaking that bond. Reineck said he knew at this time as he was talking to his partner and acting FBI supervisor that he would have to appeal to the quote-unquote good side of Cary. They decided to play it cool and eat some lunch with Cary in order to gain time to figure out a plan. This is when Reineck would ask Cary if his partner John could join them when John carried in the pizza, and Cary agreed. Reineck would go on to say that he felt a lot better when he had someone he trusted in the room and that he was no longer alone, and through the two-way glass in the room they had moved Cary to, a person with a good deception radar was watching this entire interaction. As they sat there and ate pizza, Cary started having what Reineck said were random thoughts of lost freedoms, like he was never going to get to see the Star Wars movie, and how this would be the last pizza he ate. Like, yeah, man, maybe you should have thought about that before you brutally murdered at least 4 women. Reineck said he tried to somewhat comfort Cary, telling him things like he was going to feel a lot better getting all of this shit off his chest, and that he would feel peaceful, and that it was probably a feeling that he hadn't felt in such a long time. Cary would go on to say that at least he could die with a clear conscience when that day came, and that he felt like he would get the death penalty for his crimes. In his confessions with the authorities, he admitted that he actually planned to rape and kill his girlfriend and her 2 younger daughters 1 year before he murdered Carol, Julie, and Sylvina. He admitted to chickening out because there was a male caretaker of his girlfriend's 10-acre property on the grounds. Can you imagine finding out not only is your ex-boyfriend a pedophile, rapist, and murderer, but he actually planned to do these things to yourself and your 2 daughters at one point? Oh my fucking god, how scary. Cary went on to confess that the weekend prior to the murders, his fantasies of murder and rape had become so strong that he had actually prepared a rape/murder kit of sorts. This kit included duct tape, rope, a kitchen knife with a serrated edge, a gun, and a fucking camera. I hate this. He then stated that he had stalked 4 young girls that had been staying at the Cedar Lodge, but then decided not to follow through with anything because they had been accompanied by an adult male. I did see an article where one of the daughters of his then girlfriend was talking about how it was for her to find out at one point that they were targets, and how surprised she was because she had thought of him as being caring, nice, and kind. I also read an article where the niece of Cary, I believe it was Stephen's daughter, Ashley, spoke to how it was for her finding out that the horrific murders that she had been reading about, she had said she was hoping that they would find this sick bastard, and then she had to find out that it was actually her uncle Cary. I believe it was her mother that sat them down and explained who it was to her. I tell you guys, this poor family has just been through the damn ringer in their lives, and all I can hope now is that this family and these children find peace and happiness in their lives because they deserve this so much. Not that Cary and Stephen's parents weren't great. From their testimony, the things that I've heard, at least the dad was definitely not that great and wonderful, but them both losing both of their sons is just unimaginable. This story is just so harrowing. So, at Cary's trial, it was said that both of his parents had testified about how withdrawn emotionally they were after Stephen went missing. This, again, according to Reineck's book. He goes into further detail about what his parents said on the stand, which was super interesting and sad. So if you want to read all about that, you can check out the book. I may just grab a copy for myself. At the sentencing trial, Cary shocked some of the family members when he looked directly at Leslie Armstrong, which was Joey Armstrong's mother, and apparently Joey's fiancé named Michael Raffelli, and said, quote, "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry, Mrs. Armstrong. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. I'm so sorry," end quote. It said that there were some audible gasps coming from the courtroom when this happened, as I don't think anyone expected it. Cary then went on to say, quote, "I wish I could tell you why, but I don't know myself. I wish there was a reason, but there isn't. It was senseless. I wish I had never had these thoughts. I wish Joey hadn't been there. I wish I wasn't here now," end quote. It was said during this time that his own parents, Kay and Delbert, wept. This was just the trial for Joey Armstrong, and he would later face the trial for the murders of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina. Cary, in this case, was convicted of 4 felony counts with a plea deal that him and his lawyers had reached with the federal prosecutors of the case. Cary was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree felony murder, and an attempt to perpetrate kidnapping resulting in death, and attempted aggravated sexual abuse resulting in death. And in return for the guilty plea on these charges, the prosecution would not seek the death penalty. This also kept the Armstrongs from having to go through a long and drawn-out trial where they would have to sit through hours of painstaking details about Joey's death, which, if you remember, was absolutely horrific as she was decapitated. Dude, your sorry means nothing, you piece of shit. You are sorry that you're in trouble, so fuck off. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his other trial, where he was charged with the murders of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina, he was found guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of kidnapping, and he was actually sentenced to death. During that sentencing, Jose Pepe Peloso, who was Sylvina's father, who had traveled with his wife all the way from Argentina for the trial, said that he actually considered, quote, rushing the short distance between the spectator section and the defense table, wrapping his large hands around Stayner's throat and snapping his neck, end quote. Then it said during the preliminary hearing that Jose actually made a dash for Cary, but that he was escorted out of the courthouse by several of the sheriff's deputies. Cary remains on death row at the San Quentin State Penitentiary in California. During my research, I saw that there was a somewhat new Hulu docuseries called Captive Audience, a real American horror story, where the family members of Stephen and Cary are interviewed, and I'm sure they have much more detail about their lives than the articles in the first documentary had. If you're interested in learning more about this case, you can go and check them out. I just might. And that, my friends, is the disturbing story of Cary Stayner. Pedophile, sexual predator, body mutilator, murderer, and stomach-churning piece of actual shit. Wow, you guys, I could have gone on forever with the amount of information there is about the Stayner family and just how awful all of these tragedies really were. Also, there are still some unsolved murders that the authorities have linked to Cary Stayner. Not necessarily are they going to be able to prove that he did these crimes, but he's either had like a connection to the victims or they were in the same area at the same time and looked similar to the other killings, like especially Joey. They have found numerous body parts in these same areas, so I don't know if they will ever be able to officially connect these to Cary Stayner or if they just weren't him. If they were him, I wonder why he wouldn't confess to them as he's already on death row. But it's been seen before where they link killings to people and these were for absolute sure and they never confessed to them. So who knows? I often wonder if maybe the lawyers are like, don't confess to anything more than you have or whatever. Still, what a story. Wow. I hope that all of the people who were affected by Stephen's death, the death of Cary's victims, anyone's whose friends or family were involved, that all of them find closure and peace as they deserve that for sure. I hope you guys will come back next Monday where we will cover another case here on The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on the Kill File's socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how The Kill File got started, and you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There is contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.